Good morning and welcome to our February meeting of the Flood and Water Management Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Tom Ashton, the Chairman of the committee. My Vice Chairman, Councillor Nutman, will be with us shortly. I'd like to welcome all of those watching this meeting online via the County Council website. And I would remind you that your comment will remain accessible as part of the recording. There is no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of an alarm sounding, we need to leave the chamber through the rear doors and the building through reception. Please ensure that mobiles and laptops, etc. are silent. Requests will be collated by the Vice Chairman. Requests to speak collated by the Vice Chairman. When invited to speak, please use your microphones. Moving to our formal agenda, could we have apologies for absence, please?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Helen Crawford and we have Councillor Bedford replacing Councillor Middleton. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any declarations of interest? If anything comes up, please let us know. Item 3 is minutes of the meeting held 27th of November. To confirm the minutes of the meeting as a correct record on pages 5 to 13 of the agenda pack. Are you content with those minutes? And could I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Skinner, Councillor Bunny. Thank you very much. And just a show of hands that we're happy with those. Thank you. Moving on to announcements. First of all, from me, just could I thank all of those who attended the first meeting of the working group looking into the effects and response to Storm Babette and subsequently Storm Henk and any other storms that may and rainfall events that may come along during its deliberations. There were 11 councillors present, including those online. Our first meeting focused on the impacts on internal drainage boards, and I was very pleased that we had representatives from 5 internal drainage boards present. The emphasis, of course, being on those boards that were directly affected by those weather events. Between them, they provided information on the impact of Babette and Henk on all of those areas that were affected. So incredibly grateful to both members for attending and those drainage boards. And as I said on Friday, my apologies to committee members. When you signed up to this committee, it was scheduled for 4 meetings a year, and we've got 6 meetings programmed in for this working group. But at the same time, it is valuable work, and I'm sure that you'll get a lot out of being part of it. Do we have any announcements from Councillor Davey, the Executive Councillor for Economic Development, Environment and Planning, please?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Again, I'm going to focus my short announcements this morning around Babette and Henk. So basically, the current Section 19 investigations following both of those events stands at 230. Those 230 investigations cover a total of 850 properties. That's an unprecedented number and is on a scale previously never seen by the County Council since we became lead local flood authority in 2012. My portfolio area has set the ambitious target of completing these investigations by the end of August to ensure we can get to a point where recommendations are made for potential mitigation measures or future works. The impacts of Storm Babette and Henk have been felt across all risk management authorities. A joint letter has been sent from Lincolnshire County Council on behalf of all members of the Flood and Water Management Partnership to Robbie Moore MP, the Minister for Flooding, setting out our immediate recommendations to help those currently impacted by the winter flooding in the Lincolnshire Fens and the lowland catchment areas, alongside longer-term recommendations to overcome the policy, legislative and funding constraints that are leading to adverse effects and unintended impacts on flood and rural resilience in the Fens, and to improve the effectiveness of asset management delivery by all the risk management authorities. In addition, I have written for a second time to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, urging that in the spring budget on March the 6th, there is an attempt to address the chronic shortage of funding for the Environment Agency and for the drainage boards that are being caused by failure of government really to recognise the challenges that are being created by these events, and of course ourselves. We were given the powers in 2012 to be the lead local flood authority, but with that came no money to do the work. And as you know, this is funded locally by the County Council until we can find government support for that. As an authority, we also continue to support residents affected by internal flooding as a result of both storm events. We are administering the government property flood resilience, which is called a PFR grant scheme, which has the aim of reducing the risk of future flooding and or minimising the effects of future flooding for properties. Eligible properties have been able to apply to Lincolnshire County Council for up to £5,000, which is available to help make homes and businesses more resilient to future flooding. The £5,000 grant covers property surveys, with remaining funds being able to use for physical PFR measures. To date, Lincolnshire County Council has received 286 expressions of interest for the PFR grant scheme following both storms. Subsequently, 144 full applications have now been returned for assessment and for initial property surveys to be undertaken. Those will be commencing shortly. Applications are currently being dealt with in batches, assessed against the priority criteria to ensure that applications put forward to PFR contractors can be delivered within the timeframes set out in the government guidance, and to ensure grant monies can be drawn down in the specified timeframe. And I will also add that, as you'll be aware, members of our council, we have also placed £4 million of additional funding into the flood zone area, particularly to deal with Section 19 and measures that will be identified by those investigations. And this also means that we'll be able to have increased staffing levels to help Matthew and his team address some of these challenges going forward. I'll just finally close with the thought that, as we all know, we've had another period of heavy rain over the weekend. There will be quite clearly some more surface flood water issues to deal with by that. And I'll leave Matthew to update in relation to any internal properties that might have been flooded over the weekend. The weather pattern seems to be set still for the next few weeks, so we are not out of the woods yet, and it's quite clear that this is a challenging period for not just residents that we serve, but also for farmers in particular, whose land is now underwater and has been for some considerable time. So I think that the events of Henk and Babette, whilst have an initial impact, I think there's a longer term consideration that we need to also think about, and I'm sure Councillor Ashton and the team looking at these matters will be considering all of these in the round. So I'll leave it there, Chairman, and any questions, I'm happy to pick them up.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davey. Questions, Councillor Baxter, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the update. Obviously, we are all sympathetic to those people living in the villages that have been flooded, especially in my division to Gretford and Tallington especially. There are still people who are not moved back into their houses since the event of early January. But in Tallington, which I visited yesterday, there are still about a dozen houses which cannot use their toilets and showers, and that's, I think, an Anglian Water problem. I'll happily pick that up with Anglian Water, but invite Councillor Davey to comment. But more than that, in Tallington, there are surface water drains, which are the responsibility of Lincolnshire County Council, which are still not draining, and consequently, today, there are houses which are under threat of flooding because this authority has not cleared the drains properly. What is Colin and Davey going to do about it in order to fix this so that people can A, use their toilets again, and B, not be in constant fear of flooding? The parish council has, out of its own precept, out of its own money, purchased a pump which has been running almost constantly since they bought it earlier this month, and it shouldn't be for the parish council to be pumping water. The water should be taken away by our drains. What are you going to do about it?
Councillor Davey, please.
Well, firstly, obviously, the highway drains are in my colleague Richard Davis's area, but I do know that he'll be making some announcements about a new programme for drain clearance, and I shall leave that to him to make that announcement during the course of this week. However, I would say that we have surface water issues all over Lincolnshire, not just in your patch, Councillor Baxter, and we have to address all of these. Ultimately, the most important thing is anyone who's had their property flooded, they have to be a priority for me. And any businesses that are being flooded, they have to be a priority. Surface water is a challenge everywhere across the county right now. And we have a clear view of how we're going to deal with some of these challenges going forward during the course of this year. These events are unprecedented. And being honest, I don't think in my lifetime, knowing Lincolnshire as I do, being born here, I've seen anything like this event that we've had over the last few months. Because we're in unprecedented waters, we have to think of new ways of dealing with things. But you can rest assured, Councillor Baxter, your residents will not be forgotten, and there will all these matters will be picked up and addressed accordingly. If you have an issue with Anglian Water, please discuss it with Matthew in our team, and he'll pick it up with Anglian Water on your behalf, so you don't have to chase people around individually. So I'll leave it there, Chairman.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Clark, Fleetwood and Haigh.
Morning, Councillor Davey. Simple question. At a recent full council, many of your colleagues jumped up and down and said the priority of their division was potholes. My residents who got flooded saying that their priority is not to be flooded. What is the priority of the council now? Is it still potholes? But from what you said, it does seem like you're drifting over a bit to protecting the people's, the residents' properties. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark, for that. I mean, my personal view is that the events of the last few months is now starting to prioritise water issues considerably more within the council. It's my personal view that the management of the highways, including the drainage system and the management of water, go hand in hand. So I would say they're equal priorities for the council. We obviously have separate portfolio holders for these areas, but my view is that myself and Councillor Davies work very closely together on this. We have joint meetings about programmes going forward with the leader of the council, and I'm very clear there'll be some more announcements which you'll be very happy about. And as you can see, I have secured additional money for our area, and that's what you'd expect me to do, being in charge of this portfolio.
Thank you. Councillor Fleetwood, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I share Councillor Davies' concerns with regard to properties that have had water ingress into their properties, and I'm very pleased in his last statement he just made. He did mention businesses as well, and it's from the business aspect I'm more concerned as well. I have a parish which abuts to the short ferry flooding issue that's been ongoing for 4 months, Fiskerton Parish. I have a business there that's the second largest employer in that parish. There's an awful lot of people there. It's a public house, it's a caravan site. Some of those people are tourists, if you like, or renting statics, but other people there are permanent residents. The concern I have, of course, is that last week was half-term week, and if you went into that particular location, you would not find anybody within that site, and the economic development attached to all that has been zeroed out. You can virtually kiss goodbye to any revenue that's been seen or might have been felt. So is there any level of business support available to such things? I have a village hall that's been flooded in Babette last October, and they've got a complete wipeout in the village hall. And the issue is, where do they go for money? Obviously, they have an insurance policy, but there's an excess on it. The village hall does not have many £100 in the account. So how do they get themselves back on their feet again?
I sympathise with you, Councillor Fleetwood, on these matters, which is one of the reasons I've written to government, because I don't think there's been enough prioritisation by national government in terms of funding to support communities. And I don't think enough money has been put into the basic stuff, such as supporting the Environment Agency and the Drainage Board so they can do the maintenance that we require them to do. So I think that these are real challenges, quite honestly. I'll pick these up individually with you to see if there is any pots of funding available to support them. But you're absolutely right. Even when people can claim on their insurance, there are excesses on the policy. But what it also means is that the next renewal of that policy will be a massive jump. So these are real challenges. I have a lot of concerns for businesses, and I'm really concerned about some of the farmers who are going to struggle this year. And if they can't get their crops in because the weather continues in the same pattern, then how are they going to survive later on in the year when they've got no harvest? So I'll pick these matters up with you privately, Councillor Fleetwood, just to see if there's anything we can do to help.
Thank you. And Councillor Haigh, please.
Before I destroy everything in front of me, Chairman, thank you very much. Can I ask Councillor Davey, when the investigations are being carried out on the Section 19s, are the residents informed almost totally as soon as those investigations for that area finish? And also, the ones that have applied for grants for repairs, is the money released more or less at the same time so that they can start getting on with sorting the properties out? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Haigh. There are some challenges around how money flows in relation to the grant situation, which I'll leave Matthew to elaborate on during his report later on, if that's okay. But I'm very clear. We need to help people. A local government should be a help, not a hindrance to resolving people's challenges. I'm very clear the Section 19 work, it should be open, it should be transparent, and we should not be scared of criticising people who might not have done the work they're supposed to have done, whether that be landowners, the Environment Agency, Anglian Water, or even ourselves. We should be open about any issues that arise from Section 19 work. And I would want it to come through this committee for any discussion anyway. So you'll all have a chance to pick up any issues relating to Section 19 and their conclusions, and also what that means for resolving those issues in the future. So hopefully that is helpful. And I'll let Matthew cover how we are going to deal with the grants issue when he gives his report later on.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fleetwood.
Yes, sorry, I'm going to come back on a slightly different issue. Obviously, I've mentioned Short Ferry, and there's been a road closure there for several weeks, and a lot of local residents are having to drive around a very large detour. Bardley Causeway, as an example, was closed for a week, 10 days. So that meant the bridging point between Lincoln, getting over the Witham, that you were either had the Lincoln Eastern Bypass or you went to Woodall Spa, which was one heck of a diversion to get around the Witham. But my concern comes down to local residents or people trying to get around that, in that the roadsides have all been cut up to a dramatic level, but more importantly, individuals, householders, businesses have had to drive around this area on a very large detour, affecting the carbon footprint. So is there anything that the county council can do to try and expedite something? I know that Bardley Causeway is now reopened, but it's the reinstatement of the roadsides, which I know we're going to talk in terms of Councillor Richard Davies, not Councillor Davey, but the issue is what can be done with regard to trying to get these detours, these diversions to be a little bit more effective, because at the moment in this cost of living crisis an awful lot of people are suffering. Do you have any comments about the green part of the agenda, Councillor Davey?
I sympathise with you, Councillor Fleetwood. I mean, no road closures are about convenience for certain people. So, I mean, the truth is, once this weather pattern breaks and we get some dry, settled weather, we're going to have a lot of repair work to do around the whole county, and it will inconvenience some people. There is no good time to close a road to repair it. So we're going to have to manage these. I would hope that the highways team are discussing those matters with local members before the road closure orders are actually put in place. So I will pick that up with Councillor Davis. In relation to all diversions add to the carbon footprint quite clearly. We need to minimise those as much as we can, and I would certainly be urging our highways team to think that through. But ultimately, we've got to repair things, and that's going to apply not just to us, but to all the other agencies involved with water management. And those should be done in a timely and expedited fashion, with the least inconvenience as possible.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Baxter. I think this will be the final question on this one, but go for it, Councillor Baxter.
Thank you. I'm pleased to hear, Councillor Davey, that you're planning to reduce the carbon footprint. Do you agree that these once in 200-year events, you said earlier on that it was the worst that you've seen in your lifetime. Do you agree that these weather events and climate phenomena are a result of man-made climate change?
All I would say, Councillor Baxter, is that I have lived an interesting life, and I'm not a young spring chicken anymore. So I have seen amazing weather events in different parts of the world, which can be put down to climate change or put down to natural events. And we all know, if you walk around some of the most historic buildings in Lincolnshire, you can see markings on the wall where water levels rose 200 years ago to some unprecedented level, which has never been touched again. So I would just say that weather patterns are definitely more volatile, and we need to plan to manage that process. And whatever people want to put it down to, it doesn't really matter. We still have a challenge. We know what that challenge looks like now after Storm Babette and Henk. So we need to plan on the basis that those kind of events are going to be more frequent and potentially, if they combine, could be even more damaging than what we've seen this year. So we need to plan for the future on the basis that weather events quite clearly are more volatile. And it's, we've had rain. At some point in the future, we may well get an Arctic weather system that brings unprecedented levels of snow, or 1963 event repeats itself. So, we just need to plan for all eventualities. But at the moment, my mind is clear that these water events are going to be more frequent, and we need, as an authority, to plan for those.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davey. I appreciate that's probably a slightly longer and more intensive question and answer session, but thank you, colleagues, for your questions, and Councillor Davey for answering them in detail. Are there any officer announcements that I need to cover at this stage that won't be covered otherwise? No, thank you. Which takes us neatly on to item 5, which is the Storm Henk and the Flood and Water Team update, including Section 19 investigations. And I shall hand over to Matthew to take us through that, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everybody. If I may, I will take the paper in the report as read and just summarise some of the pertinent points. But here we are having another committee. The last one we were talking about the effects of Storm Babette. This time we're talking about the effects of Storm Henk. And together they have caused significant issues, as has been ably highlighted in the discussions that we've just had. But this has been a county-wide event and has really impacted a lot of people. It's been devastating for people, the amount of flooding that we've seen across the county. So just to pick up on particularly the Section 19 investigations that are coming out of both of these storms, we've talked about the numbers. They are the highest numbers we've ever had to deal with following a single rainfall event or rainfall events close together. And we are aiming to get to the recommendations as quickly as possible with the target date of the end of August. What I would say is that there is a lot of discussion already ongoing, both with communities through parish councils. I've attended numerous parish council meetings, as have colleagues. We've also discussed with individuals as well, and have had a lot of communication and correspondence direct into the team, as you can imagine, following the storm events. So we are very much engaged with people when they have been in contact with us to inform them what we're doing or the course of action that will be taken as part of the investigation. And I would just say I know that's been replicated across by colleagues across other risk management authorities as well. So there has been a lot of engagement. When the investigation process is in full swing, residents and businesses and those who have been affected will be contacted and spoken to by the consultants that are undertaking the work on our behalf on this occasion, so we can ensure that we do capture all of that local knowledge and intelligence following the event, which will feed into the investigation process and no doubt influence recommendations that come out of that. Obviously, any individual investigations, residents will be entitled to see that information where they've been directly affected themselves, which is only right to do so. And obviously, if there's any particular recommendations that come out that involve future works or mitigation measures, we will, of course, engage with the community as we move forward. Some of that work, of course, could be on an individual basis through particular risk management authorities, or wherever possible, we could look at joint working and joint approaches if there's particular issues that we need to address collectively. Just moving on to the flood recovery framework, which has been touched on today, particularly with the property flood resilience element that Lincolnshire County Council is administering. But I also just wanted to make people aware that there were several frameworks, grants made available by government following Storms Babette and Storm Henk. And just to pick up on the businesses that Councillor Fleetwood mentioned, there is a small to medium-sized business recovery grant where they can apply for up to £2,500 through that process to help return quickly to business as usual. That is being administered by our district council colleagues across the county. So that may be helpful to some people if they're not already aware of that. Ourselves, Lincolnshire County Council, are specifically managing the Property Flood Resilience Grant. The numbers Councillor Davey mentioned there about the interest, expressions of interest in the applications that we're dealing with. That's been administered and led through Lincolnshire County Council to comply with the government grant guidance that has been issued by DEFRA. And Lincolnshire County Council will be applying for that grant to draw down, and we will be working directly with the property flood resilience industry for the surveys and the installation measures to hopefully make it as streamlined and efficient process as possible for residents to get that work completed as quickly as we possibly can. There is, this is a grant that is national, and we are aware that neighbouring authorities are also dealing with a huge volume of interest. This has been widespread, obviously across the region, not just Lincolnshire. So we have a property flood resilience contractor that we're working with at the moment, and those surveys will be starting very shortly for those people that have been applying to us. I will leave it there for now, and happy to take any questions as always. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillors Bonney, Fleetwood and Skinner, please.
Thank you, Chair. Matthew, you mentioned quite rightly about the Section 19 that the property owners are entitled to see the reports. Are we going to make sure that those reports are distributed to those people, or that they know how they can get hold of them? Because all too frequently people say they're out there, we might know as members, but they don't always get through to the individuals where the situation is. When you go knocking on the door, have you seen this? You get all sorts of blank looks.
Yes, so the information is widely available on the website where the causation of the flooding and recommendations are published for all the investigations. So that is freely available. When the investigations are undertaken, we can make it clear to residents that as the homeowner, they are entitled to see a report. We do have to be slightly cautious with the information that we can put out in the public domain because we have to comply with GDPR regulations, of course. And in the full report, that can include personal information. So, yeah, that can be dealt with. We can work around that. But, yes, residents and homeowners that have been directly affected will be entitled to see that report. And the summary recommendations are always published on the website anyway, so that is always freely available.
I think the point is, I accept all that, is actually that to make sure that, say they're entitled, but if once it's been released, if a letter or a card or whatever could just be sent to the property owner, giving them the direction of where they can go to get it, I think would be of help.
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify, yeah, we can certainly do that. Yeah, completely agree. We'll make sure that can happen.
Thank you, Councillor Fleetwood.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, recently I've attended 2 flood meetings, one in Fiskerton where Matthew turned up, and another one which I chaired in Langworth where Matthew also turned up, and that one was quite a passionate meeting to say the least. There was 1 or 2 issues there. I'd like to publicly thank Matthew for putting his time in because, as he said, he's been to various meetings. I think it does go slightly further than what his job description says, as indeed do a lot of the other water management officials that have been going around to these public meetings. However, moving on, and we talk in terms of looking at the West Lindsey, the number of properties internally flooded at the top of page 20, and I note in West Lindsey there are allegedly 20 properties recorded. I know at Langworth there was probably 5-ish or more. I know in Bardney there was 1, so that leaves 4 for the rest of West Lindsey. And I just wonder if, unfortunately, my district county area has been hit a lot harder than anywhere else, or indeed there's just a lot of other properties that haven't been either recorded or haven't fallen in the criteria. I don't know if there's any comment there. Thank you, Matthew.
Yes, certainly. So the numbers, obviously when this report was written, things have probably changed slightly since then because we're constantly reviewing new information that is coming in and looking at the information that we've got to assess whether people have actually been internally flooded or not. So to be honest, these numbers will be a constantly evolving picture as we continue to work through this information. But of course, as you rightly point out, Councillor Fleetwood, we can only act on the information that we have, and in some cases we may not have had reports actually come through to us that properties have been flooded, and of course that is sometimes at the discretion of the homeowners as to whether they wish to make us aware of that. So we can only act on the information that we have, of course.
If I can come back, Chairman, effectively a lot of people will not make the council or anybody aware, because then if they do go for insurance at a future point, if they're fortunate enough to get insurance, or indeed want to sell their properties, they then have a property that may well be tarnished with regard to that data. So, a lot of people may not come forward to try and make us aware and try and bring things forward. So that is a moving feast, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Skinner, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Matthew, I know you're as passionate as I am about the near misses as well. It's not just Section 19, so I'm just really seeking assurances. I mean, Boston Borough only had 3 flooded, but I know a great deal more people were affected by water table, and it then impinged on Anglian Water's ability to take the sewerage. I'm just looking for assurances that all these near misses have actually been picked up. Thank you.
Yes, they have, and I can give you some reassurance of that, and that's probably an omission on my part here because we've concentrated on those internally flooded with the Section 19 investigations. But yeah, county-wide, we're in the region of around 600 near misses as a result of Storm Babette and Storm Hank. So again, significant. If you add that to the number of properties that have been internally flooded, it really does paint a significant picture county-wide with the numbers that we're dealing with here. So yes, all of the near misses that we are aware of have been logged. As I say, it's in the region of 600 county-wide again. But again, all of that is really important important information to feed into any recommendations or mitigation measures that we might look at, because whilst we've talked about the properties here, we know that there's a huge amount of agricultural land has been affected. There's the much wider impacts. 50 plus road closures for 2 to 3 days at a time, which had a huge impact on the travelling public in Lincolnshire. So it has been a really huge impact county-wide for a number of different reasons. But yeah, absolutely, the near misses are critical into building that picture of what we'll be looking at.
Thank you. Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Chair. Carrying on with what Councillor Bunny brought up, the Section 19 reports. It says in today's report agenda, page 8, residents also receive a copy of the final S19 report. This gives the impression that it will be sent out automatically. So what I want clarification is the agenda, the minutes that we agreed correct, or do the residents have to actually ask for a report? Also on the report, is insurance companies involved in the report, the investigation? Who actually carries out the investigation? And are local councillors involved as well? Thank you.
So to deal with the insurance question first, no, insurance companies aren't involved with that. It's looking at the causation and recommendations to fix any problems as a result of that causation. Councillors, obviously, if there's local information available there, then of course, yes, you're part of that discussion, just as the members of the public are. So, obviously, more than happy to engage with that conversation, of course, because we want to gather all of the information, and obviously, it's about making you aware of the outcomes as well, just as it is with the residents. On this occasion, for the Section 19 investigations, we've actually commissioned 3 companies who have extensive experience in delivering Section 19 investigations on our behalf, and that is just simply because of the volume of work that we're dealing with here, and because we want to get to those recommendations as quickly as we can in a timely manner, so we can look at where those mitigations and future works might be. Traditionally, Section 19 investigations were not distributed because the recommendations and causation was published, but it is something that a question we've been asked numerous times since, and as I've said, that is now something that we're looking at doing, where that information will be made available to residents, and they can be informed of that as part of the investigation process, so that they know what will happen and when that will become available to them.
I think this is the first time I've heard that these 3 companies are involved. I thought it was going to be done internally. Have the 3 companies been given any brief, or have they got an open field on, what they find out is what they report? And does the investigation start from the minute the resident phones up to, getting someone out to look at the flooded area?
So ordinarily, the Section 19 investigations would be carried out in-house. That would be normal procedure, and that would be instigated straight away. At the moment, we're dealing with 850 properties across the county, and that is just beyond the scope of what we've got at the moment. So this is why we've commissioned 3 separate companies to get that work completed as quickly as possible, and they have had a very strict brief as to what they need to follow based on previous Section 19 reports that we have undertaken and the format that we follow to get to those recommendations. So there's 2 members of my team that are working very closely with these 3 companies throughout the process to make sure that they adhere to that guideline that we've set out and work with them.
Thank you. And Councillor Beale, please.
Thank you, Chair. If I heard correctly, you're hoping to complete, Matthew, the investigations by Section 19 by the end of August. Curious with regards to the report, page 17, that shows there are still some investigations ongoing from 2019, 20, 2021, etc. Sort of what's the reason, or is it because there's been a reoccurrence of flooding on those particular ones, please? Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a combination of things with some of those. Some of them it is reoccurrence of flooding, and some of it is that these reports come to us at a later date. So although they might relate to those years, it's something that has come out subsequently as time has gone on. So not everybody reports at that point in time. So some of these are legacy ones, and some are because it's time has come. People have reported at a later date, or it's come out as works have been doing on site. What we absolutely want to do is get all of the investigations Babette and Henk sorted, finalised as well, because again it's important that they are, as we've said before, we get to the recommendations so people are aware what the consequences are and what we can take forward from there with any mitigation measures.
Thank you very much. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you. The residents in my area, particularly in Gretford and Tallington, have three organisations that they hold responsible, at least for the trouble that they faced during Storm Henk, but also that they are, as I mentioned earlier, suffering today. The Environment Agency has certainly got some questions to answer, both in Tallington and elsewhere in the county. The Anglian Water, I think, are responsible for sewerage, and I don't understand why people in the 21st century are having to wait more than 10 days to be able to use their toilet. I think it's completely unacceptable that people should be in that position, and I think, do we have anyone here from Anglian Water? I'd welcome a comment from Anglian Water as to why people in Tallington are still suffering without toilets at this moment. And thirdly, there is quite a lot of blame on Lincolnshire County Council because of the lack of, because the storm water drains are not working. I recognise Councillor Davies' comment earlier on that there'll be some kind of announcement later this week. If it's possible to have a sneak preview of whatever it is that Richard Davies is going to announce, I'd love to hear it, and so would all the residents of Tallington that are suffering. With response to what happened earlier in the month, particularly in Tallington, but also in Gretford and elsewhere, people were disappointed in the response of Lincolnshire County Council, particularly being told that the response to virtually everything is to log it on Fix My Street. People's confidence in Fix My Street is weak, and I think if your carpets are getting soggy, then being told to log it on Fix My Street is not the kind of reaction that is perhaps wanted. We do have to say good words about Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue Services, who did loads in terms of pumping water in Tallington and elsewhere, and did a great job. So well done to Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue. And also, it's not a competition, but South Kesteven were also applauded by the village, and the parish council also did a lot. The district council and the parish council shouldn't be the people who are responsible for fixing the flood. Sure, we should all play a part in it, but do you have any comments about lessons that have been learned regarding the county council's actual intervention at the time of the floods? Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm quite happy if, Matt, you want to pick up any point on Anglian Water as well, but we'll start with Matthew, please.
Yes, thank you for that. So, yeah, a number of things there, and I'll let Matt make any comment from Anglian Water. Just to pick up on Tallington and Gretford specifically, fully aware of the devastating impacts in those two villages, as well as, as we've had widespread across the county. On a personal level, I don't know what the outcomes are, but I do know that both Environment Agency colleagues and Highways colleagues have already been out to, I believe, both villages to meet with the parish, or certainly some representatives, to discuss some of the issues that occurred and to see if there's anything that can be done. So again, it's just another example of, whilst there will be a full investigation as part of the Section 19 process, that doesn't stop us having those conversations now where we know that there may be particular issues that could be addressed. So I do know there's some ongoing discussions there at a personal level. I'm afraid I don't know what the outcome of those meetings were, because I've not had a chance to catch up with colleagues yet. But again, that will feed into the process. As regards the response, obviously the Lincolnshire Resilience Forum and Fire and Rescue and others are involved with that. It's a multi-agency response where all organisations, risk management authorities are present to feed into the process as to where things are happening and how we may respond to that. And I know that there are, as is always the case, there are debriefs happening as to what worked well or where improvements may need to be considered, both as a result of storms Babette and Henk. The fact that they were so relatively close together and the impacts were widespread from both, that is being undertaken by colleagues in the Lincolnshire Resilience Forum. Fix My Street was an issue that was picked up at the time. Because of the volume of calls during Babette particularly, Fix My Street was seen as an effective way of gathering information quickly, but again, it's sometimes, you know, only as good as the information that is received in there, or, you know, being able to respond to it in a timely way when you're dealing with that volume of calls. So whilst it does have its advantages, Fix My Street was flagged as something to review, as to see if that is the most effective way of recording information moving forward, or if there's something that we can do better, and that will form part of the wider debrief through the Resilience Forum. I think at one point we were in the region of around 1,500, 2,000 messages coming through Fix My Street during Storm Babette, which is obviously in a matter of days. So huge volume of calls countywide and information coming in. So that was quite a challenge to accurately assess that and make decisions from it. So, but again, that will all form part of the wider debrief and review when we look at these matters more broadly.
Thank you, Matt.
So when we operate a foul network, the foul network sits underground, and when we get overtopping of watercourses, as we saw in Greatford, the foul network will becomes as much victim to a flooding as people's properties do. As soon as in Greatford the water levels subsided, we did get out there, reset all our vac stations and our foul pumping station, and closely monitored it until its resolution, till the sewer system got back to an element of normality. I would note that our CEO and also Director of Customer Service who live in the area were offering use of their washing machines, who are connected onto a different network for people who are really struggling, so, you know, led from the top there. In regards to Tallington, it's been a chronic issue of ours for a number of years. We did do a partnership scheme with Lincolnshire County Council 2 years ago to try and resolve some issues with the surface water network that runs through Tallington. What we found actually is it's a very old system that is actually a soakaway, and it doesn't actually flow anywhere. It's got a sand bottom and is designed to drain away. We found a lot of silt that we cleared out. I did mention to Highways at the time that the situation could be greatly improved by putting proper road gullies in there, because they're currently just curb blocks that don't capture or capture the silt. So the situation could be improved by fitting proper road gullies where you can capture the silt in the pit at the bottom and allow water to get into the surface water system. I'm not aware currently of any issues in Tallington today, although I have just asked my network manager to have a look at that. I'm back from a week and leave myself, so I'm not currently up to date with what's going on at the moment, but happy to catch up afterwards, get some specific details and some assurance that we will get on that today if there are still people really struggling.
Thank you. I didn't get an answer about the clearing the gullies from Lincolnshire County Council, and I recognise that some work was done 2 years ago. As I understand it, a scheme was put forward and half the money promised was spent, so it may have fixed half the problem. Thank you for your explanation of the surface water drainage. However, I am astonished that you don't know that there are people who have been without toilet facilities for over a week. As Anglian Water, they have been phoning Anglian Water every day, and I would say that if you are not aware of problems currently in Tallington, then you need to get your internal communications sorted out, and you also need to get the drains in Tallington sorted out.
Thank you. I think some of those points might be worth picking up after the meeting. if there's of a technical nature that need working through. Just one question from me before I go to Councillor Bunny. I'm assuming with our section 19, when we've done Babbitt and Henk, we'll cross-reference across to 19 and 20, just to make sure, first of all, if there's anything that's still reoccurring, and more to the point, if what we have fixed since 2019 is successful.
Yes, absolutely. Give some reassurance that we will look back at historic records, and that will include previous Section 19s as well, to see if it is a recurring problem or something that that is new. But yeah, absolutely, reference will be made to previous investigations as part of that process.
Thank you. Councillor Bunny, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. You've basically asked the question I was going to ask, but I would also like to say that actually Fixmer Street, I would welcome that we do look at that. I think one of the biggest problems with Fixmer Street is that it's not a voice at the other end, and when these people are phoning in, they need to reassured that it's actually going through. And I also have to say that whilst we all do have landlines and things like that, sometimes when you're trying to get through using mobile phones, etc., you don't always have the connectivity that you might need in some areas of the county, and that does also cause frustration. So I'm not sure that it's the best way necessarily in an emergency to receive that information.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else indicating to speak. Could I just say from my part that I'm particularly grateful that there is the ambition to wrap up these investigations in a timely fashion, and that the investment, the funding has been made available to in order to make that achievable. I'm very keen that the working group that's operating in parallel to this committee will be able to pick up that information before we are due to report back, I think, to our October meeting. So that's really helpful from my perspective, that we're picking up everything that we're able to do so in that time scale. That takes us on to item 6. I think we're which is the Environment Agency update on pages 25 to 44 of the agenda pack, and I'll hand over to Morgan to take us through that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As with Matthew, provided quite a comprehensive paper, so I'll leave that largely unread, and I'll pick out a few highlights from that. So, as Matthew refers to, Storm Henk saw a further approaching 40 millimetres over the already saturated catchment. We suffered a further 3 breaches in our flood defences, flood embankments over that time, notably sort of the lower Barlings area that Councillor Fleetwood referred to, the Borno and the lower Welland area. We're now focusing our efforts on the recovery effort. That's involved inspection of nearly 10,000 flood risk management assets across over 2,200 kilometres of raised defences. We've commissioned survey and full assessments of those damage, employing consultants and contractors where necessary to assess that. One thing that's been quite heartening really is to see the partnership working that's been undertaken between all authorities, particularly ourselves and the IDB, particularly the Witham and Humber boards, in order to facilitate their recovery programme. As been stated previously, those boards suffered quite extensive damage to many of their pumping stations, and we've been working with them in order to put through the funding proposals and business case needed to be able to facilitate some of those repairs. Community resilience is an important part of what we do, and after any flood event like this, when we've issued flood warnings and flood alerts, we do quite a lot of validation of those flood warnings to make sure that those flood warnings were issued at the right time and in a timely way, and to look at any improvements that we can make on those going forward. So it's a hugely important part to what we do after in the recovery effort. I've added. Throughout all this time, we're still aiming to complete our quite ambitious programme of capital schemes, and those schemes have not stopped. In addition to our own local area staff working on these schemes, we do have quite large project teams working on those schemes who are based throughout the country. So those schemes don't necessarily stop during flooding. We continue to contribute to those. So, for example, Saltfleet to Gibraltar Point, the annual beach renourishment is again programmed this year, and we're also working on reviewing contracts for future years. We continue to work with partners to develop a sustainable and resilient catchment on the Ancombe, the middle Ancombe. We've seen some effects from flooding in that location during both Storm Babette and Storm Henk, and hopefully some of this work done in the future will help us to complete a more sustainable catchment going forward. Wainfleet, we spent lots of authorities and ourselves spent the afternoon there just over a week ago on a Friday afternoon, and actually coincided with a period of high water as well, so we're able to see firsthand some of the impacts there. But some of the work that we've done in the past, I think, has probably paid some dividend there. This committee will no doubt be aware, we looked at the catchment action plan there in 4 different themes, so looking at the flow through the system, the raised defences, flood water storage and increased resilience for the community. So in all those themes, different aspects have certainly paid off throughout the community. There's still more to do there, and we're working closely with partners to continue with that action plan going forward. Boston, the committee will be aware that we've been looking to complete the scheme. There's over 500 houses still to claim in terms of improved flood defence there. We're still looking to complete that by 2026. There's the further work that's required there is in the wet dock around the port, and we're hoping to start that work sometime, hopefully by the end of this year, or at least early into next year. The Lower Witham work, so looking at the strategic work around the Lower Witham, again, area impacted by recent storms, and it's important that we evaluate what's happened recently in terms of going forward with the strategic work. Certainly one thing to note there, we've been approached by landowners to look at more sustainable resilience measures there in how we put back the damaged assets in that location. So we've had some really productive meetings with local stakeholders and local landowners there. Gibraltar Point to Freeston Shore, looking to improve the flood embankment along there between Gibraltar Point and approaching Boston. Continue to progress the outline business case in that location, again hoping to complete works within the current 6-year period. The River Slee project, I think it was mentioned at this meeting last time that there was some issues in the Slee catchment, so we're sort of reviewing again the impacts of Storm Babette there, looking at local water courses to see how that would feed into the improvements we want to make to the flood defence assets in the Slee catchment. And finally, the Lower Witham works are, as I mentioned, we spoke with landowners, but there's also works arising from the strategy. So these are physical works which we want to complete by March 2027. So again, continuing to progress these. We've just received engineering information about all of these the assets in the Lower Witham area. We're now prioritising these works together with what we've learned from Storm Babette and Storm Henk, again to complete these works in the current 6-year programme. We've also been carrying out, as the papers mentioned, a lot of incident management training, which is really important for our staff. We've had a lot of staff involved in rosters and incident response over the past few months, and even over this last weekend we've had full shifts sort of rostered up with impending rainfall forecasts. So it's been a period ever since October of continually sort of rostering up shifts and stepping back. So as we've said before, you know, this weather forecast, this weather pattern looks like it's here for a little while longer, so we'll continue to do that. And I'll leave it there, I think, and take any further questions.
Thank you very much. Just a couple from me to start things off. In respect of the Boston barrier works, and you're mentioning the work needed on the dock, I'm assuming these are the dock gates, what's the reason for that being? That seemed to have been held up for a little while. What's the reasoning behind that? And what resilience is currently in place with the dock, appreciating that in an event where the barrier is needed, that this is potentially still a weak spot in those defences.
Yeah, so you're right, yeah, is around sort of the dock entrance there and completing the gate work there. And as it's a working dock, it's a working port, these arrangements are very sort of complex to put in place, so that's the principal reason for the sort of the prolonged construction sort of period in that location. As far as the additional 500 properties, I believe that these properties are on the, I suppose, the higher end of risk, or the lower end from your point of view, so at least risk, mostly impacted as the effects of climate change kick in. So you know, they're probably the least at risk properties. So going forward, we hope, as I said, we hopefully complete this scheme by March 2027.
Thank you for that. And I would also take the opportunity to endorse what you were saying in respect to the partnership working that we've seen across Lincolnshire during the event for the last few months. Both our internal drainage board assisting the agency where it was necessary to protect the banks at Fiskerton there. I'm aware that the drainage board more or less ran its pumps into the ground to try and get that water out. And also running the other way, incredibly grateful for the over-pumping and pumps that the agency has made available in Lincolnshire, again to help those drainage boards getting that water back out again. You know, I mean, I think everyone would agree that long term the shift has to be to greater resilience, but at least in these incidents that we've seen, everyone has pulled together as far as, I think, in quite an impressive way. So genuinely thank you for that. I've got speakers, Councillors Higgs, Beale and Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Morgan, I've been told that that throughout Lincolnshire there's been 12 incidents of breaches in main rivers, including overflooding. Can you tell me, if that's true, how many of the projects have been started to remedy this? And I'm not going to preempt your answer here, but is the issue financial with your budgets for the area, or is it a manpower issue? Thank you.
Thank you. So throughout our area that we cover as an area office, so we cover sort of the Anglian North boundary, which covers both the North Lincolnshire councils and down into Northamptonshire as well. So throughout that area, we've had 13 breaches, plus a considerable other asset damage as well. So although we've had breaches in some area, we've also had locations such as Fiskerton where the riverbank hasn't breached, but there's been some damage to the embankment there. We haven't received any national funding or any specific additional funding into the Environment Agency to repair these breaches. We have managed to secure some funding to get some of those studies started. So looking at the engineering reports, the investigations and things like that. So we've employed consultants to be able to do that. We've also commenced some of the repairs in some of the locations, which has involved moving money from other areas. So, but principally, yes, we haven't received money to complete all those breach repairs. So partly, your answer is Correct, yeah. We haven't received money for all the beach repairs, although we've managed to find some money for some of them. So, for example, in the Low Barlings area, the Short Ferry area, we're hoping to start to repair on the left bank, that breach. Contractors are hopefully starting there today, and we're also working very closely with the local IDB in terms of looking at repairing the right bank. So that's on the Fiskerton side in the next few weeks. So there's work being undertaken there. As far as manpower is concerned, yes, manpower is always a challenge, because people who are, as I said, we have many different priorities. We have the existing capital schemes which protect many thousands of people, which we're continuing to progress. Which is, as Councillor Davey mentioned, protecting people and property is a huge sort of priority. Also, those same people work on our rosters for the instant response as well. So at times like this, yes, manpower is stretched, but we try and always prioritise the current incident. So issuing flood warnings, making sure people are protected by our defences and they're operating. In terms of the actual repairs themselves, the other thing I would mention as well is that the ground is also saturated, so it's very difficult as well to get onto a lot of these sites to effect those repairs without extensive sort of pre-works as well. So there's a combination of issues.
Thank you very much. Councillor Beale, please.
Thank you. Looking at Crowland and Coppet Wash, it's reported yesterday that work is hoped to be started in 2 years' time for the breach there. One appreciates overall it's a major project for the Environment Agency, but with no apparent remedial work being undertaken, normal rain and high tides are further damaging the breaches and, of course, flooding the valuable farmland. Yeah. One appreciates protecting homes takes priority, although some would say animals. It's just worrying, though, as I say, if no remedial action is being taken with some of these breaches, that the damage is going to get worse, and say, just with normal rain and tide.
So a scheme referred to in the paper, the Crowland and Cabot washes, was a scheme that was in place before Storm Babette and Storm Henk. So this was looking at the wider operation of those washlands there to see if those could be made more effective going forward. So that was the scheme that was planned to start in 2 years, which is separate to repairing the breach, which again will hopefully look to receive some funding towards that going forward. And if possible, would like to repair that before that time, before 2 years' time. So they're two separate things.
Thank you. So perhaps on hindsight, should the Environment Agency not have declared Bebel and Henk sort of emergencies?
Sorry,
They weren't they weren't classed as sort of emergencies, were they?
We took them extremely seriously. We worked with our professional partners with the Local Resilience Forum to work on that. Are you referring to the sort of the status from the strategic command group, that sort of thing, with our local resilience partners?
If I understand right, if they were described as emergencies, etc., then you could have got more central government funding.
Oh, I see what you mean. No, so that's something which is not necessarily an Environment Agency decision. That is something which is an agreement made with the Local Resilience Forum in those forums.
Thank you. And just for reassurance, Councillor Beale, that will, I'm sure, form part of our questioning on the working group when we get to the colleague from the LRF. Just picking up, while we're looking at the Crowland and Cobbett washes, I can't help noticing that at the bottom of page 35, it talks of doing of understanding the flood risk associated with the operation or non-operation of the washes through modelling and mapping. To what extent has the River Welland helped with that mapping and modelling process, given that we've got anyone driving along there will see that the water has helpfully found its own level through those washes following the breach. So it's possible to work out where the low points are, where the water is, where the water courses are, and how that system in there works. But also my understanding is the Mills Lock or Lock Mill which is supposed to be the discharge for the Crowland and Cubbit washes in the event of it being used as a wash, has difficulty operating with the wash having shrunk by a couple of feet since those installations were put in, and certainly since it was used to be used on a regular basis for flood storage. To what extent are these issues that have been flagged by the breach and the water that's in there and the difficulty getting it out, will they be taken into account as part of this project now that we've got that evidence? Again, I'm very pleased that to see that the notorious inlet siphons were already forming part of this study, given that local evidence would suggest that they haven't operated since they were installed in 1975, and they certainly didn't operate this time. The river flowing over its banks and cutting and causing a breach before they came into operation. And the tree that's growing in the outfall again suggests that they haven't had an awful lot of care and attention for a long time. So taking this as an opportunity, could you give us an idea how much of this will be brought into this project while the opportunity is here?
Thank you, Chairman. I can't comment on the specifics of the Crowland and Calbit washes, but in general, if you look at the impacts of Storm Babette and Storm Henk across all of our catchments where we've got capital schemes and current modelling in process, so we've got the steeping at Wainfleet, we've got the Lower Witham, we've got the Slee, and we've got the Welland and Crowland and Calbit washes. So events such as this give us an opportunity to recalibrate those models. Because models are hypothetical in their nature. You put in a hypothetical flow in the top end and you see how that impacts the catchment. When you get a high level event like this, it gives you the opportunity to calibrate those models. So using hard and fast data of what's actually happened is a real help in terms of making those models more accurate going forward. That has benefits for things like flood risk mapping going forward, so for the town and country planning process. It has benefits for us planning new schemes, also has benefits for things like establishing flood warning areas and helping to also feed into things like Section 19 reports and things like that going forward. So, I mean, it's unfortunate to have flooding, but from a modelling perspective, it does help us to calibrate those models more effectively.
Thank you, Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Just 3 questions really. On funding, is the government going to give us any more funding for, the riverbanks? Would more funding stop the breaching that occurred? When breaching does occur, why is it you only can put back as it is, not as it, not to improve it? And the final one was, I've been told 70 years ago, I can't remember it, some of you might do, that Lincoln got flooded. And it was a result of the floodgates opening to save Nottingham, etc. Is there any likelihood that Lincoln will get flooded because of these reasons in the future?
So I spent 23 years of my working life managing the flood defences in Nottingham, and there's no connection between the flood defences at Nottingham and the watercourses in Lincoln. The only potential connection is at the Fos Dyke at Torksey, where the River Trent can sometimes get tide locked, which we've seen over the past week or so. So obviously that's many kilometres downstream of Nottingham, so there's not sort of the hydrological link there. So certainly during Storm Henk, we worked very closely with our East Midlands colleagues to look at the forecasting around that area, and we worked very closely with them around management plans should that arise. Thankfully, it didn't quite reach the top of those gates, and we deduced that even if it had gone over, it probably wouldn't have been going over those gates for very long, probably on the tip of the tide, that location. However, we will, as we said, we need to recalibrate our models. This gives us some really good data going forwards to look at forecasting things like that better going forwards. On the funding front, our funding's based on predominantly people and properties. So you mentioned Lincoln yourself. So the flood defences worked largely as predicted for Lincoln, and they reduced the risk of flooding to approaching 10,000 properties throughout Lincoln. So as you know, within the last few years, we've spent considerable sums of money updating the defences in Lincoln itself. Where we do have a challenge, as you stated, is in the more rural locations where the funding formula doesn't quite work in the same way. And we've seen a lot of breaches in locations where although some property and businesses have been impacted, you haven't seen the large mass of homes and businesses in those locations. So it's really that kind of process playing out to a certain degree. In terms of trying to get more money in for the future, we recognise that locations like this suffer from that funding formula. So that's why we've got things like the Fence 2100 plus strategy just commencing. So this is looking at the whole of sort of the fenland landscape, right from Lincoln down the east coast all the way down sort of Cambridgeshire area, putting together the need for those flood defence assets and drainage assets throughout location, and presenting that to potential policymakers to explain what different levels of funding perhaps in the future would give us in terms of those sustainability of those defences.
Thank you. Go on.
Just the one on the breaches. When a breach does happen, do you have to put it back as it was, or can you put it back as improved?
So traditionally, when we have received money for breaches and for recovery money, the recovery money has to be has been given to put those defences back to the pre-storm condition, if you like. So we won't be raising defences wholesale. It's to put back the defence to the pre-storm height. I would add to that, though. Sorry, that we're looking to work with landowners in some locations to look at more sustainable recovery. So rather than putting defences back to the original condition, working with landowners to see if there's something else we could do going forward. I know some landowners in the Low Barlings area, for example, have come to us to work with us to think about how they could be funded, for example, for using their land as floodplain going forward.
Just picking up on one point there in relation to the Foxdyke and Torksey, I don't know quite how close a run thing that was. There seemed to be the impression, some impression that it was fairly close to the top of those doors. Has the likelihood of the Trent overtopping at Torksey and coming down the Foxdyke, has the likelihood been assessed? Has the effect of that been modelled, and are the consequences planned for?
Apologies. And I'm just saying that the Trent is a complicated catchment to model. It takes in 3 large tributaries, one from Birmingham, one from the Peak District, one from most of Lincolnshire. You know, they spend a lot of time trying to get those modelling and those predictions right. In terms of planning for that scenario, yeah, we do exercises. So looking back to, I think it was FloodX just over a year ago, one of the scenarios was just that, is looking at, you know, high levels around the sort of the Torksey area. So we have sort of exercised that scenario before. And also during the event as well, we have planning cells which work very closely between ourselves and our East Midlands colleagues to look at potential impacts and likelihood and mitigation around those sort of events. I think we were predicting something like I think it was something like 6.7 or 7. I forget the actual. It was 7.7 meters AOD was prediction. The actual lock gates there, I think, are 7.69. So we're just looking at a slight overtopping. I think it actually topped out, the peaked at 7.42, something of that order.
Thank you very much. Councillor Baxter, please.
Thank you. I've got a few points on it, I'm afraid. Chair, as you know, we attended a seminar at the House of Commons lately about the impact of finance on the IDBs, and certainly from my experience with the IDBs recently, the IDBs can only do so much, and what the IDBs do is irrelevant if Environment Agency are not also doing their job. It is the common view of people involved in IDBs and victims of flooding generally that the Environment Agency is not doing its job. This might be because of national funding, it might be because of management within the Environment Agency. I don't really mind the reason, I just want to get to the cure. And one of the things that is said about the Environment Agency is that you're very good at capital schemes and great big like some of the schemes in here have got eye-watering amounts of money attached to them, and some of the smaller schemes that you do in terms of eel sanctuaries and badger hostels and so on are laudable, and in terms of biodiversity that's great, but in terms of keeping your assets working as they should, we have seen a massive example of how they're not. The breach in the Bourne O and the breach in the Welland shows that the assets that you are supposed to be maintaining have not been properly maintained and are not fit for purpose. And if it's popping out in the Bourne O or Welland today, then it's going to be somewhere else. So I'd welcome comments on the adequacy or otherwise of your ongoing maintenance. Secondly, I'd like to ask about the particular issues within Gretford and Tallington. At Gretford, it seems that the gauge, which I think is known as the Shillingthorpe gauge, as the waters got higher and higher during Storm Henk, eventually the gauge failed. Do you know if the gauge failed or whether the facilities were just overwhelmed? In either case, whether it's a malfunction or an overwhelming of the facilities, what is the short-term, medium-term solution for people who live in Gretford as to how we're going to stop that happening again, how we're going to make sure that all the infrastructure does what it's supposed to do so that people don't get flooded? And in Tallington, I've already mentioned the problems with LCC drainage and with Anglian water drainage, but there is a view that the management of the bank of the Welland at Tallington requires an extra pump, certainly requires attention. There was talk about a non-return valve that was or wasn't working. I don't know if that's the actual reason for the flooding. Certainly, the fields that are supposed to be the flood plain seem to have less water in them than the village that's full of houses. And the houses in the village which were flooded, it is argued, could have been flooded less if there was a pump to either push the water back from the dike into the river, or to take the water from the dike and push it over into the floodplain where it's supposed to be. So can you please give some explanation to the residents of Gretford and Tallington how this situation happened in the first place and how it's going to be prevented from happening in the future? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll pick up the first point about, I suppose, the role of the Environment Agency in terms of ongoing maintenance and priorities. So our job, in effect, is to prioritise the money that we're given. So we've just signed off at the recent RFCC a similar budget for maintenance as previous years. That budget doesn't take into account inflation, so it's getting even more challenging to distribute those funding throughout the various catchments. Our funding is prioritised on, as I said earlier, people and property. So, as I said, places like Lincoln, where the flood defences work largely as planned, protected up to 10,000 properties, and similar could be said in other parts of the catchment area. We do struggle to find the funding for more rural areas, particularly where there's no properties at risk. If it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, I will have to take some of the questions around Gretford and Tallington away with me to get more fuller answers. But obviously, there's a Section 19 process underway which will look at some of the causation to flooding. As far as the gauge is concerned, again, I will have to take that back to find out the details of the gauge in that location.
I have to say that's disappointing. I don't know if residents of Gretford were able to try to register to speak at this meeting, or whether we don't. I don't know what the process is for residents speaking to this public meeting. But I've got to say I'm massively disappointed that the Environment Agency has come to this meeting to talk about an agenda that is mostly focused on Storm Hank and cannot explain the causes or the solutions to the problems in my division and others.
Thank you. I think at the same time it is probably worthwhile just taking that time to make sure that the information that comes back is detailed and it does cover those specific technical points that you're raising. And I appreciate that all of us will have our own detailed knowledge of the systems in our parts of the county and elsewhere, but at the same time, how some of these systems operate are going to be a little bit complicated, and it'll be the teams on the ground, if I'm right in thinking, Morgan, that will have that information in that kind of detail. Just picking up on the mention there of IDBs from Councillor Baxter, I'm aware that some of our Lincolnshire IDBs have incurred significant costs evacuating water that came into their system by one means or another, but mainly out of Highland carriers. And I know that there are boards that have submitted statements of claim to the Environment Agency on that basis. I was just wondering if you could perhaps update the committee on how that is going and where the money to meet some of those claims is likely to come from, should the Environment Agency be able to help.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we've been working very closely with the internal drainage boards around some of these statement of claims. So they've come in different forms or different categories of funding, I guess. So the first one is around the repairs to existing pumping stations. I've been working very closely with those boards in order to be able for them to put in a business case which enables access to capital funding. And that money has been allocated from our national office for that purpose. Should national government money become available for those recovery efforts for those IDB pumping stations, then we can transfer that funding from that already from that capital funding to that recovery funding. But we've certainly worked with them to, as a precaution, to put in those business cases so that money can be accessed this financial year. In terms of the extra pumping costs, so we've also worked with our national colleagues to look at facilitating Highland Water contributions in those locations and look at reprofiling those so it helps with the cash flow of IDBs. I believe that's been largely successful, and that is in process. The other part of the claim was around basically it's around the incident response. So we work very closely with IDBs. We work with them to and their workforce to help them to facilitate manning pumps and things like that we've provided, and so we've worked under the PSCA arrangements. That's a public sector cooperation agreement. So we're currently processing payments as far as that's concerned. So yeah, in short, we're working really closely with the IDBs, and hopefully we've got some positive outcomes from that.
Thank you. That's really good to hear. But just picking up on, you mentioned the Highland Water, which is national funding. Am I right in assuming that most of this funding will have to come, and I'm not saying, incredibly grateful, I'm sure Bord are likewise, of the good relationship between Bord and the EA, which is making some of this statement of claim possible to process. But am I right in thinking that a good chunk of this is coming from existing local or relatively local Environment Agency budget, rather than being effectively new money that's coming on a national level to try and help?
Yeah, it's not necessarily local money, but it's certainly money that was within the Environment Agency.
Councillor Fleetwood, then Councillor Hobson, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I knew you'd get to me eventually. This isn't going to be personal, and thank you, Morgan, for turning up at the at the Fiskerton meeting, where he did a very good performance with regard to the slippage on the banks of the Witham and kept the local people informed, which was excellent. And we've talked an awful lot about just downstream of Fiskerton and the Low Barlings area, the Short Ferry area. But in that area, there is a thing: when is a reservoir not a reservoir? And the answer to that is when it's dry. So there's an area called Branston Island, it started off life as being a flood storage area, a flood containment area. It's now deemed as being a reservoir. And a week ago, I asked of a fairly key person within the EA why Branston Island was dry when there was 1,500 to 2,000 acres of land all around it, to the depth of 2 to 3 metres depth of water, farmland, which they didn't have to pay compensation for if it was flooded. Branston Island, of course, has a tenant on it, and I believe that the EA have to pay a payment to the tenant if it gets flooded. Now, in order to get this flood storage area, reservoir, in order to get that flooded, the River Witham, I believe, needs to get to a certain height. And that triggers, and amongst other criteria, it might be predicting rainfall, etc. But it needs to get to a certain height. The Witham needs to get to a certain height before it's flooded. And it's very significant because it's the first opportunity, and probably one of the only opportunities, between Lincoln and Boston to take water out of the River Witham between the Glory Hole and Boston. We've talked about Torksey Lock, and Torksey Lock was within 6 inches of overtopping, and although it's suggested that a small overtopping wouldn't be significant, I just wonder about the strength of those lock gates, because believe you me, if a lot of the Trent water came back into Lincoln, you wouldn't see a lot of Lincoln, and Morgan's alluded to the fact there's 10,000 houses in Lincoln. If you look at where the River Brant was in Lincoln, it was within 2-3 inches of the top of the concrete channel going through St Catherine's and beyond. But the question comes, how much does it take to flood Branston Island? And the answer is the River Witham probably at this moment in time will never ever hit the trigger level because of the breaches on the Barlings. And so whilst you have local farmers with grade 1 agricultural land being flooded with no compensation, some of them planted crops between the floods and lost 2 crops, most of them not being able to plant anything this year, where do those farmers go? Some of them, I believe, have got Environment Agency pumps on loan. However, the pumps are there, but the farmers are actually putting the diesel in themselves at their cost to try and evacuate the water, to try and get them back to a level where they can have an income stream back in place, where they can start to do what they try to do, and that's farming. So the question is, what does it actually take to flood Branston Island? Does it need to hit a certain trigger level? Where does it come from? I know it's a bit technical, and I know Morgan's probably going to say, I'll have to come back to you after the meeting. I've asked the same question of 4 senior Environment Agency officials within the last 7 days. I've not had a finite answer, and Morgan's alluded to the fact that the banks are going in place. Well, I actually told Morgan just before the meeting that was what was happening, and Morgan came back and confirmed to me that was the case. But where do we go? It's a real issue from the communication levels of the Environment Agency, because if I've asked 4 senior officials what's going on, and I've told them what's going on, because I can feel it from within the local communities, you know, you don't get contractors on site without somebody noticing them. You don't get assets, pontoons, floating pontoons to a location without asking way leave or some compensation to farmers, or at least the ability to go over the land. And the question is compensation if there's damage. Do the farmers get compensation? Because at the moment the farmers are just suffering. So what does it take to get Branston Island flooded?
Thank you. So I think, thanks, Councillor Fleetwood. So I'll just take Torksey gates in the first instance. I think during my time working on the Trent, I seem to remember them being replaced at some point, so they're comparatively new gates. And I think, as well, I'm right in saying there's also the backup of the lock gates there as well, which aren't quite the same level, but certainly do act as a backup too. In terms of Branston Island, it's as you're aware, on the Witham we have 3 key flood storage areas, so both 2 upstream and Branston Island downstream. And you're right, they do work on trigger levels, and those trigger levels are based on the agreement that's been made with the landowners in those locations. They're legal agreements, so it's very difficult for us to change those trigger levels going forward. I will, however, take it back with me, as you suggest, you know, and I will find more information on that. But generally speaking, where we do have flood storage areas, there's a legal agreement with landowners, which is based on certain characteristics, certain levels within the watercourse.
So if I can come back, Chairman, how do we encourage a more positive outflow of information from the Environment Agency with regard to what's going on? Because yes, there's an awful lot of water in these large channels, be it the Trent, be it the Witham, but how do we actually get the organisations, even at an officer level, to make people aware? Because it would appear that even within the Environment Agency, the staff are struggling to find out what's going on. So what chance do we as a county council, the district councils, sorry, we as a district council, the county council, drainage boards, all the public have, when will they actually know? How do they have the opportunity of finding out? There needs to be a more positive flow of information from out of this organisation.
Thank you. Well, I'm certain that we will hear before our next, certainly you will hear in good time, and that we will hear in time for the next meeting of this committee how Branston Island works. Because I'm on a personal level fascinated to know, having looked at it on Google Earth and the structures on there, and not having any further knowledge than that. But it would be really interesting to know what the conditions for its operation are, as you rightly point out, when there are significant breaches in adjacent watercourses. It would be interesting to know why that storage facility isn't in operation. I can help you with the definition of a reservoir, as it whatever it is defined by the 1975 Reservoirs Act. And that even goes as far as requiring a specific type of engineer, a panel engineer, to do any work, to be involved in overseeing any work on banks and that project. And there's only 24 of them in the country, and I'm very pleased to meet one on site at the breach of the Cubbit Washes when I happened to go down there. So they are around, but they are quite rare. You'd like to come back?
So if I can just come back, and going back to the Barlings Bank, yes, as you come downstream, the left-hand bank is, it has a contractor hopefully going on site today to put their Portaloos, their welfare units in place, and I'm hoping they're going to make some pretty quick progress, and they're going to fill the breach, which is excellent. 2019 there was a breach, well, 50 yards apart, if that. That was filled up, and that's held this time. But there's a further probably 300 metres of riverbank that is porous, unstable, and more than likely going to blow at the next opportunity. And I have video of water teeming through the banks, not over it, through the banks. So whether that's rabbit holes, badgers, whether that's down to cracks in the bank and the stability of it, how does somebody get to a stage of upgrading the whole of that asset, because it is on corners of the river and it is unstable. So although it might be filled in the next few weeks, although it might be pumped out again, as soon as we see more rainfall, I believe it won't be too long before we see the bank blow again, possibly not at that location, but it might be 20 metres to the left, 20 metres to the right.
Thank you. I'm sure we will keep an eye on that, and I have absolute confidence that you will report it back to this committee on progress. Councillor Hobson, please.
Thank you. Just want to pick up on points on page 41 of your report regarding flood resilience engagement. The work that you've done, particularly in East Lindsey and various locations, both on the coast and further inland, that have been highlighted recently, is very welcome. I just want to pick up on a couple of things there and ask you, I suppose, two things. What value do you put on the engagement work that you do with communities? And from that, perhaps you can enlighten us as to what other engagement work you'll be doing at other locations, not just in East Lindsey, but across Lincolnshire that we've heard about this morning, and how that will be communicated to those communities so that they can have that opportunity to engage with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we put enormous value on that sort of engagement activity because it highlights to communities things that they can do to enable their own resilience. So particularly one of the main parts of that engagement activity is to sign people up to flood warnings and to let people know how they can understand their flood risk and give them help and advice on that. In terms of a programme going forward, I don't have that at hand, but certainly following Storm Henk and Storm Babette, as we've mentioned with the risk management authorities, we have attended several events over that time. A couple of weeks ago we attended a Wainfleet event where people were very interested in resilience matters. So going forward, I think there'll be further events in due course. We're constantly arranging with different parish councils to go and see those. So that will be on an individual basis. Obviously, we do have to review the engagements of activities going forward, because obviously it's quite dynamic with different sort of flood events that are coming along. And we do have sort of limited engagement resource to be able to do that as well. So, yeah, we do place great importance on that activity.
Thank you. I have Councillors Ashley Morris, Skinner, Brooks and Briggs. Councillor Ashley Morris, please.
Many thanks, Mr. Chairman. This is, I mean, I can honestly say I sort of share Councillor Baxter's disappointment with some of the answers we've had. But one thing that I'd like to know, Short Ferry, when the Barlings O burst on early January, to my understanding, during the day when it's 5 minutes if that, from an Environment Agency depot, fully staffed, so there must have been people there then. I mean, surely it must be glaringly obvious that a generator getting overwhelmed by water is ridiculous. And that should have been, you know, I mean, surely that must be a bit of forethought would have avoided that problem. I don't know if there's any comments.
When you say there's a depot fully staffed, I mean, there's a depot there that has staff who are based there, but those staff will be out and about throughout the catchment doing various different activities. In terms of, I mean, I'm not sure of the specifics around the timing of being able to procure the right equipment to be able to move generators and things like that. But again, I can't comment any further about that.
Point of information, Chairman, I was there when the bank breached and there were local farmers with teleporters willing to move the said generator. The generator was worth, I don't know, between, let's say, 70 and £100,000. I don't know. It's a robust thing the size of a lorry back. It went underwater.
I mean, on similar, just helping out with the background to that, I was fortunate to be on a tour with Witham and Humber Drainage Board, standing on that bridge next to that generator at the point which the water was beginning to come through the bank, alongside most of the top brass of the Environment Agency in this part of the world. So I, as I have said previously at Regional Flood and Coastal Committee, it does feel a little bit embarrassing that in the time that was available, as Councillor Ashley Morris has put with her question, that more couldn't have been done to prevent what was a really key piece of equipment from being inundated. But
Chairman, as another point of information, I was not at that meeting. I wasn't invited to that meeting. I wasn't aware of the meeting until after the meeting had been held.
Thank you. Councillor Skinner, then Councillor Brooks.
Thank you very much, Chairman. A lot of the work of this committee, you could actually say, is about the water table, and it greatly affects everything we do, whether it's angling water, whether the sewage system works. And yes, Councillor Baxter, I have 3 parts of my ward, principally Old Leek, that struggle with their sewage systems because of water table. And it's not that unusual for the road system to struggle because the water table is too high, so the water simply has nowhere to go. So it's not a big concept. But I'm heartened on page 42 that the asset of the South 40 foot is being weeded, because we talk about data and things. That was the first asset to be demudded, and actual fact, the data on the Black Sluice board shows how well that river drains following that, and it's quite a good concept that if we make the asset actually deeper and contain more volume, actually we shift the water table down. That's really quite clever. And then if we move on to steeping and look at the steeping, the assets changes there where it's been again demudded, it's showing itself to be a lot better. So I would actually be pushing for demudding of all of our trunk rivers. I mean, as a paddler, I've paddled the steeping, I've paddled the Bain, and I've paddled the Slee. None of them had that sort of work on them. Well, the Bain, for instance, not had any work since 2007 on depth of channels and stuff. The Witham is very similar. It's becoming very hard to navigate. It would actually be quite a good project to actually demud all of these, create some volume, create some drainage to actually put them back to where the asset was designed to. And then Tom's bank engineers can come and have a good look. Thank you.
So, like you say, we've carried out quite an extensive conveyance work on the South 40 foot in conjunction with partners, Black Sluice IDB under the PSCA. We also carry out similar works on the steeping and other water courses. We do find that the annual weed cut is quite effective at managing conveyance. Obviously, going forward, that's one of the most important things we do, and it's one of the things that we prioritise. It's more difficult to prioritise, as you say, the desilting kind of works. That's generally a lot more expensive than the normal sort of like de-weeding type activity. And as I previously mentioned, you know, funding is limited in this area for those sort of purposes.
Thank you. Councillor Brooks, please.
Thank you, Chairman. There's no need for me to go now. I indicated before you asked the question about the financial impact of repumping water after the failure of EA assets, the impact that has on the drainage boards of having to repump that water and the possibilities of getting compensated for that expenditure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think just drawing out comments around that and the comment from Councillor Skinner and Morgan's response, it does really feel as though there is simply not enough money in the system for the Environment Agency to do everything that it needs to do, and let alone what we would like them to do. And I think it really does demonstrate the willingness to work together and to find solutions, such as we're seeing with the statements of claim and the willingness to meet some of those. But at the end of the day, if that money is effectively having to be found in part from existing budgets covering this area, then that's going to put on additional pressures, whereas what we really want is more money coming into the Environment Agency and into flood risk and water management in Lincolnshire from national, rather than just trying to cover it as is being done with goodwill and good intent at the moment. Councillor Briggs, please.
Thank you, Chairman. In part of my ward encompasses North Scarl, which is a small village, and it has Mill Dam Dyke running through it, which runs into the Trent. North Scarl have actually formed an action flood forum, and they've been in contact with the EA. The initial letter was the 21st of January. Whilst I've been in the meeting this morning, the EA responded, which is quite some time. Their rationale is that they've had lots and lots of inquiries, and it's taken them ages to get back to everybody. However, within the village, there is a contractor who has equipment that could be used to help clean out Mill Dam Dyke, and he is fully qualified, and the machinery is a piece of kit that the EA don't have, but he's been refused, and I'd like to know, if possible, why he can't be utilised. And also, the EA have agreed to come to a public drop-in session at North Scarl, and when is this likely to take place? Thank you.
Thank you. So North Scarl and the Mill Dam Dyke, as you mentioned, flow into the River Trent, which is outside my area of jurisdiction. But I will take those comments back to my East Midlands colleagues to follow those points up. What I would say, though, is that we've started sort of discussions with the NFU across Lincolnshire with regards to looking at see how the skills of the farming community can be better used going forward. So that's certainly an area of that we'd like to cover, and that might involve things, as you suggest, using local people with the local skills and equipment to do work on our behalf and under the risk management authorities. It's at early stages at the moment, but it's something we'll be working with the NFU and others on going forward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bedford.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a simple question, really. What has happened to the Bellwyn system of claiming money from central government? we were told at an IDB meeting last week that district councils can't claim it, IDBs can't claim it, the EA can't claim it. It has to be the lead third authority, which of course is Lincolnshire County Council. And nobody seems as though this time round, throughout all these storms, that nobody has enacted the Bellwyn system. Now, when Boston had the major flood back in 2013, the Bellwyn system brought an awful lot of money into the Boston district, but nobody seems this time round as though they have applied for it. Or has that now disappeared? Has it been superseded by more local stuff? I'd just be interested in an answer, Jim.
My understanding is that Bellwyn is only available where an emergency is declared, which is for the LRF colleagues to make that kind of decision. And I understand that they usually make that decision based on the threat to life, but I'm happy to defer to colleagues that have broader and deeper understanding, appreciating that Matthew isn't able still to be with us. Colleagues, anyone? Chris?
Thank you, Chairman. My understanding, Councillor Bedford, is that it's the government that stands up Bellwyn and we then apply into the Bellwyn scheme. So unless the government stand it up for us to apply into, it's not operable. That's my understanding. We'll get back to you on that. Double check it.
David.
Yeah, if I can perhaps add a little detail to that as well. There are a number of authorities who can specifically apply for Bellwyn funds. That is, county councils, unitaries, and district councils can. We have recently heard, in fact, in the last series of events, in the past, IDBs have piggybacked on some of those claims. We have been told explicitly this time round that we cannot do that. IDBs are no longer eligible, apparently, for Bellwyn funds at all.
Thank you. Not seeing anyone else indicating to speak, I will thank Morgan for your presentation and answering the questions that members have put. I think we've had a thorough and extensive discussion on that. We've perhaps gone substantially over time, but as with previous meetings, I would much rather facilitate an extensive discussion where members have the opportunity to get to the bones of these issues and raise the point that they need to do, rather than sticking too intensively to schedule. So once again, thank you for your comments. Thank you, Morgan. What would perhaps be useful, certainly for me, certainly I'm sure members of the committee would appreciate, is if we know roughly when the breaches that we currently have in main rivers across Lincolnshire, if we know when they are likely to be fixed, where in the programme, at what point over the course of this year, notwithstanding things such as ground conditions, if that could be communicated through to the committee and out to members, then I think that would be useful just to know what's going on and when it's happening, appreciating that we haven't got another meeting of this committee scheduled for a few months, and just picking up on comments that have been made about just making sure that people know what's going on. That would be really appreciated. Thank you. That takes us on to item 7, which is the Anglian Water update. Matt, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll keep it brief in the interest of time. In relation to Storm Henk, our organisation was in a very similar place to the Environment Agency. We stood up an internal incident, collaborating with the LRFs across our entire region. That's from the Humber right down to the Thames. The challenge for Storm Henk was this was a region-wide incident. Normally, when we see more localised issues, we can pull resources from other areas of a business to support and supplement. But you know, we saw impact right across Lincolnshire, Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex, and the area we call Roughampford, which is Peterborough, Northamptonshire and Bedfordshire. We have deployed and prioritised tankers to protect and mitigate the impact on the environment, and this has at times occurred to the detriment of people's having functioning facilities. And I'm glad the water table's been mentioned here. Groundwater is has had a real impact for us. In Lincolnshire, across the areas of Scotwick, I know has been very badly impacted. Meveringham, Hainton, Dunstan, those areas across the Lincolnshire chalk and extending into Norfolk. I'm pleased to say that thanks to the collaboration between Anglian Water, other water companies and the Environment Agency, there is what's called a regulatory position statement currently being written by Morgan's colleagues that will allow in future the abstraction of groundwater where there is a significant flooding risk to allow us to essentially dewater an area and stop groundwater from causing a particular problem on our foul network. You know, one of our big points to this is we want to try and stop it from causing an impact in our foul network. Something we did en masse in 2020-21 was overpump into watercourses. There's been lots of questions why Anglian Water hasn't done that this time, and I think the final item on your agenda is quite honestly why, that we understand that you know, we've committed to not applying for any more storm overflows, and you know, overpumping you know, very heavily dilute sewage into watercourses is essentially creating a new storm overflow. So again, that has come at the expense of people having facilities, and sometimes at the expense of external flooding, but hopefully that gives you our commitment to the environment, and you know, that we won't just take the easy way out when it comes to this work. Our recovery is well underway, and we are working with all organisations to ensure a collaborative response. I appreciate, as we had following Storm Babette, there'll be a lot of interest from councillors, county and district, to get the frustrations of their communities across, and we absolutely understand that. As Councillor Baxter and Councillor Bunny have sent emails in this meeting, we're more than happy to meet local communities, parish councils, district, you know, communities, and explain why, you know, why the problems are occurring, and what Anglian Water and joint agencies are doing to try and combat that, as we didn't see in Stickney with Councillor Bowkett and Matt Warman, the MP. There was you know, over 150 people attending that, you know, quite difficult public meeting. I'll leave it there. There'll probably be questions for me, so I'll keep it brief for that reason.
Thank you, and you're probably aware that there are still issues in Stickney and Stickford as account of the rain that we've recently had, and I'm sure Councillor Bowkett will pick those up with you with a degree of keenness if that's something that can be facilitated. Question from Councillor Skinner, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And indeed, Old Leek as well in areas still having problems, but we're aware of VA struggling with maintenance issues. Do we have any maintenance issues? Certainly in Old Leek, I'm told that one of the pumps on the vacuum system isn't working. Is there a regular fix, or because obviously parishioners, having been devoid of sewerage for probably longer than Councillor Baxter's, they're obviously wanting to know. Thank you.
So vacuum systems are in a way perfect for Lincolnshire because it's quite flat, and vacuum systems work when we've got a very flat area to operate in. But they are also their own enemy from a certain extent, and what I mean by that is they when there's an introduction of unflushables mixed into vacuum systems, they can cause vacuum pumps and valves to stick open, vacuum pumps to stop, and the vacuum systems really struggle. So in terms of maintenance, vacuum pumps operate like any other pumps, and if a pump needs replacing, we will replace it. But you historically, the issue we see on vacuum system are vacuum valves being stuck open, with cotton buds as a prime example of things that keep vacuum pumps open, and the introduction of surface water into the vacuum system as well is not particularly helpful. And one of the key points we made at the meeting in Stickney, because the cul-de-sac Councillor Ashton has just referred to the impacts that Councillor Bowkett has had, is only there when we get the addition of surface water into what is supposed to be a foul-only system. So our priority in those areas has to be trying to find a way to get that surface water out and stop it from causing a problem in the first place. That will be our priority for Stickney, and the other areas. Greatford is also a VAC system, albeit, as I said, it was impacted by the overtopping of a watercourse, but in Old Leek, very similar position. So we understand the impact that this has, but I'll make the same point I did in Stickney, that when there's only foul-only flows going into the foul system, and I appreciate that's not all the time, but when it is, the system copes absolutely fine and doesn't have a problem. So our priority has to be finding a way to separate and get rid of the surface water that shouldn't be there and get that into a more sustainable way of draining.
Thank you very much for that. It is quite a different system, the vacuum system, to the old system, where on the flat you actually relied on the water to shift the unshiftables. But just one question on that. Vacuum pumps, etc., is it a standard system, standard spares? I think people would take some reassurance that you actually carry in stock.
Yeah, so we have agreement with suppliers and service level agreements for vacuum pumps. We actually have a workshop now at Cannock Sewage Works, just up the road, where we do actually, as terms of our in our mission for not binning so much equipment. We do refurb and recycle pumps now rather than just order new. So we do have a stock of vacuum pumps in Lincoln, and we have agreements for new delivery of stock. So, it is a different system, but we hold stock of vacuum spares just as we do normal kind of, submersible pump spares.
Councillor Haigh and then Councillor Fleetwood, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Like Councillor Skinner and Councillor Baxter, I've got issues with residents in Silk Willoughby that haven't been able to use their toilets since the first storm. So they've had significant problems. Now, the small sewage treatment works, which is down at the end of Church Lane in Silk Willoughby, I understand is going to have a new biofilter fitted to cope with the extra demand. So I'm assuming that it's a sewage treatment works capacity issue rather than surface water entering the sewer. It is fairly low lying there anyway, but I'm trying to find out when that work will be carried out, because the residents there are really struggling to use their toilets. Some of the houses down there, they can actually use their upstairs toilets, but this goes on for days and days. So I'd appreciate, Matt, some sort of information on that. Now, regards to vacuum systems, sewers, I've always disliked vacuum systems with a vengeance, because it's mechanical, so it will go wrong at some time. It's a cheap method of putting in so that you don't have to dig the sewers down so deep where you've got a gravity sewer, but you will always get issues with anything going into the system that shouldn't, such as fat and things like that. So I've never been a fan of sustainable urban drainage. I don't agree with that, and I don't agree with vacuum systems, but that's just a personal preference, Chairman. Thank you.
I'm not aware of the specific details around Silk Willoughby, but I will get the right person to get in touch after the meeting, if that's okay.
Thank you. Councillor Fleetwood, please.
Thank you. Again, no disrespect to Matt, but a comment with regard to Anglian Water and Babette. If I take you to a village called Langworth, and recently I've held the flood meeting there 2 weeks-ish ago now, various organisations were invited, including Anglian Water. A reminder was sent. There was no response from Anglian Water, which is an absolute shame. During the course of that meeting, there was a lady there that had spent some time in hospital. Her bungalow had been flooded to the depth of a windowsill, along with all her neighbours. And she was most upset about brown things floating around in her lounge, which weren't hers, and other associated debris. And this had presumably come from the either the flood system or the storage system across the river on the other side, and how that debris managed to make it into the property, I don't know. During the course of Babette, the parish council chairman was asking for tankers to come and pump the sewage system through, and of course that took several days. There was no response, and that's unfortunate. So there does need to be a whole lot better communication and response from Anglian Water. But again, nothing personal to Matt.
What I would just say on Langworth, it's an issue that we've been aware of for many years, and as you're aware, we've met and spoken about Langworth many times. Just to give some idea of the flows we saw in Langworth. So we have a storage tank, as you know, Malay-by at the bottom of Langworth, that's 145 cubic metres, so 145,000 litres of water. That filled from empty to full in just under 15 minutes. So that tells you that isn't just sewerage. There is a third-party influence on our network, whether that's for Barlings O, whether that's a groundwater spring, but that tank was designed and sized to withstand a 1 in 25 year event, and you know, given how quickly it filled, that is not just foul sewage in itself causing that. So we do have some work to do in Langworth to try and understand what other influences there are on our network. But I'll make the same point I made to Councillor Baxter and Greatford, that as soon as we get overtopping of watercourses and flooding of areas, our foul network is as much a victim of the flooding as people's properties are, and an unfortunate consequence of that is you will get solids escaping the system and entering people's homes and gardens. It's not ideal. It's a horrible situation. But and the reason we will not supply tankers in most situations is all you end up doing is pumping away essentially river water, which you know, it's not a sustainable use of tankers. So yeah.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. This approach is slightly on the next item, that during the floods, St Catherine's in Lincoln, Rufford Green, Westbrook are all the same. They all say, you know, if you mention partnership, they'll just die laughing, because Anglia Water Board, they rang up, residents rang up, house getting flooded. Anglia Water Board's response was nothing to do with us, ring up Lincolnshire County Council, put the phone down. So it's not really projecting a partnership here. It's, you know, when people's houses, we can all understand, is really, you know, upsetting, stressful, they need assistance, and I hope that the working group can come up with an answer to this, because just giving people numbers to ring and nothing happens is a waste of time.
I understand the frustrations of a local community. What I would say, though, to challenge that is that if Anglian Water was to attend, we would send a field technician out with a van and a jetter. And if you've got overtopping, as we saw in St Catherine's of a watercourse, there's absolutely nothing those staff can do, and they have to walk away. The unfortunate situation is where we see these mass flooding events like Henk and Babette, we have to prioritise our staff to make where they can have the most impact. That unfortunately means that where people are impacted by third-party sources of flooding, whether that's groundwater, whether that's river water, we have to prioritise attending those calls where we know sending an engineer with a jetter and clearing a blockage or, you know, will make a real impact. We don't carry pumps like the EA can deploy or the fire service. But literally, when you call Anglian Water, we send someone out. We send a van, a 4.5-ton van with a jetter that can clear blockages and make sure our system is flowing and function as it's designed to do. So I understand the frustrations of the residents. and we are working on our scripting in the call centre to help portray a more collaborative message, because I agree passing people from pillar to post isn't particularly helpful. However, to challenge the point about partnership, if Matt was here, Chris will hopefully back me up, Mr Morgan, that we do work very closely together. You know, post-event, not always reactive because we have our own priorities, but post-event, we do get together, we do look at where we can help, and there has been funding from Anglian Water to the council and vice versa to help with projects in the past post these events. So I would challenge that we do work collaboratively, we do work in partnership. That might not come across during an event when everyone's firefighting, as it were, but post-event we do work collaboratively. We do. Lincolnshire is probably one of our best examples of a collaborative working relationship.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter.
Thank you. Firstly, as Mr Moore's mentioned, we have exchanged emails during this meeting, so I'm very grateful that you've offered your personal attention to the issues of Gretford and Tallington, and I look forward to meeting you in those villages. On a wider point, it's of no consolation to anybody to say that, and it may well be true, but when we say, well, we've known about this problem for years and it's a problem that we haven't been able to solve for years, absolutely no consolation whatsoever. In fact, it probably makes matters worse. I understand that we're working with some very old sewerage systems, and I understand that in some of the villages it's possibly that's part of the problem. The reason why the foul sewerage and the surface water is getting commingled is because of the old networks and old systems, and I don't know what would be the long-term solution to that, because presumably you can't afford to take up all the old Victorian sewers and put down clean, effective pipes. So that's one question, is kind of what's the fix to that. The other question is, I'm glad to hear that we're one of the best examples of partnership working in the Anglian Water region. I should hate to be in the worst, where we have situations that require a joint approach, for example with the surface water drainage in Tallington. How can we move that on? From where I'm sitting as an elected councillor in the county council, what can we do to enable you, the Anglian Water and the Environment Agency and our own officers to shift it on? Do you need more encouragement or more money, or just get out of the way? How do you think we can help fix it?
So first of all, in terms of what you can do, and I'm going to mention this again because it's all gone very quiet on the national front, but Schedule 3, you know, the continued lobbying and support of the elected members for the government to reenact that as was promised, you know, last year, would be incredibly useful. I appreciate there's been various papers and mentions from the council on that, and there is someone at Lincolnshire dedicated to looking at that, but that's gone very quiet. When we talk about where surface water comes from, it comes from people building extensions, building sheds, building conservatories, and builders finding a gully and putting surface water into it. It's as simple as that. It's not homeowners' faults as such. You know, they get a contractor in to do the work and may divert water that was once going to a soakaway or whatever it may be into the foul system. So what we can do, what the long-term strategy is, quite simply working with homeowners to remove those connections. They are technically classed as illegal connections, but working with homeowners to remove those connections.
If I might interrupt, is it covered by building regulations? Is it something that our district council building regulations function could be pursuing more rigorously?
So it is in regulation. Just as it's also in the Water Industry Act, it specifically states that it's illegal to put surface water into a foul sewer system. Has there been any successful prosecutions under that part of the Act? No, there hasn't, of course. So there probably is it is in building regulations, but whether district councils and planning enforcement would take any real enforcement action if they came across it, I can't answer that. Probably not. but Anglia Water are working with homeowners, not at our own expense to get these done. And work was done in West Epping and Tallington following the winter of 2020-21 to remove a lot of domestic connections away from foul sewer system, and that was done entirely at Anglia Water's cost. We also fixed a number of Lincolnshire County Council's highways assets along the way, just because we were busy working at the time. So, when we find these problems, we are working to try and resolve them. I wouldn't say age of the system is the problem. Victorians knew how to build sewers, and probably some of the best examples of building quality are still in some of the old Victorian brick arch culverts that we still find in pretty good condition across our region. It's just where people add surface water into a system that's not sized and not designed to take it. And it's Anglia Water's job to work with those homeowners to find a way of dealing with that.
Chairman, point of information, building regulations for district councils. District councils do not control building regulations now. 5-10 years ago, it became a scenario where external contractors could go and look at sites, so it doesn't just fit within a district council function.
Thank you. I don't see any further speakers on this. There is one question that I would just put out there if we're talking on partnership working, and that is around evidence that I'm picking up anecdotally from the planning system that we have developments that are unable to proceed or unable to gain consent. Not necessarily because Anglia Water is objecting to the connection, but because the Environment Agency has concern that were the connection to be made, it would cause excessive overflows or the risk of overflows in the future. And there are developers that are quite happy to look at putting their own systems in, but of course they then can't get a permit to discharge because hypothetically they should be able to use the main connection, but they're not able to use the main connection because there's another objection against. Can you comment on how widespread that happens to be, and whether it is something that is going forward going to be a major restriction on economic development and growth in Lincolnshire, and what can be done between Anglian Water and the Environment Agency to make sure that this isn't an issue long term?
So we have seen increasing examples of the Environment Agency essentially objecting to planning applications because of capacity in our sewage routes or in our network. And this is the odd situation where, because Anglian Water isn't a statutory consultee, we don't have the power to actually object. And we, as most people should know here, we have no powers to refuse a connection to the public sewer as it stands. That's why I made the point about Schedule 3, which is incredibly important. So we've seen some examples of it. Councillor Ashton will be the honest answer. I've not seen it as widespread as I've not seen it so widespread. However, I will ask our planning team to reply to that question in writing to you. Actually, I have just sent an email because there's a development currently in the East Lindsey area that is affected by this exact problem. So she is currently writing a response to that. So I'll forward that response on because that'll be a very generic response, I think.
Thank you, I'd appreciate that. I think if it is something which is an issue that's only going to grow, it would be useful to have an understanding of it, and it may be something we might want an item on a future agenda to pick up on, depending on how significant an issue this is. But thank you once again for your presentation, which I'm content that we note. And I'm sure any comments and feedback can be picked up. But once again, thank you, colleagues, for your questions, and Matt for your presentation and taking the time to answer them. Takes us on to item 8, which is the Storm Impact Working Group. And this is on pages 45-51 of the agenda pack, and seek to put on a formal footing the arrangements for the working group. The working group, we did. When I say the working group, it is the same membership of as the committee, just operating under a different constitutional umbrella. The working group did consider these arrangements on Friday and supported the approach. So I'll hand over to Simon to present the report, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. As the Chairman has already said, this is very much a procedural item. I will take the report as read because it was available at the working group or presented at the working group on Friday. No changes were recommended by the working group, so if the committee is willing to do so, this would put the working group's arrangements on a more formal footing. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And I would just draw attention that the key effect is to allow the working group that was set up to investigate Storm Babette to formally take into account Henk and any other storms and weather events that may come up, appreciating that when we set that up, Henk hadn't arrived. Would someone be so kind as to Councillor Skinner to move?
Very happy to move, Chairman.
Councillor Bunny to second. Could I just have a show of hands on that, please? Thank you. That is agreed. That is just a little bit of housekeeping to keep us all in order. And that takes us on to item 9, which is the County Council resolution on sewage discharges. Colleagues, you'll remember at our last meeting on the 27th of November, the committee deferred consideration of a County Council resolution on sewage discharge into rivers and into the sea, and this item is set out on pages 53 to 65 and includes the presentation on this topic that we, I don't think we did see it at the November meeting because we deferred. So the committee is invited to discuss the issues raised by the County Council motion, to note the information contained in the presentation by Anglian Water, and 3, to decide whether to request the County Council, the Executive Council for Economic Development, Environment and Planning to take any further action. Matt, are we to receive, were you going to talk us through the presentation, or are we... Oh yes, so we do. Yes, thank you very much. It's been a long time and there's been a lot happened, but thank you. Yes, you did present that for us and we have got it in our papers. So that being the case, who would like to open the batting? This generated quite a lot of interest when it came to Councillor Fleetwood.
I'll help you out, Chairman, for once. Yes, I mean, this is predominantly with regard to sewage discharge directly into watercourses and going out to sea. And we've talked about it in flood scenarios, but generally there's the issue where we have these overtopping facilities, and Langworth's been alluded to, whereby once the storage tanks are full, at Langworth things are pumped away and taken away in tankers. But in a lot of locations, that is allowed to spill into watercourses, and I think nationally it gives an opportunity for some of this effluent to disappear in different directions and potentially affect water quality. Way back a few weeks ago, I was interviewed by Countryfile to talk in terms of oil drilling and gas storage in the Wolds, and I was talking to them about the River Bain. And I can remember the River Bain when I was very, very small, having trout in it, and it was a chalk-based stream, and it had quality water in it, and you could go to Hubbard's Hills and see trout in the river. You could go to Horncastle and in the River Bain. Again, you'd see trout in the river as you wandered through the streets. You could look over the bridges and see them in the streams. But now, of course, there is no trout because the water quality is gone. And it's whether the quality of this effluent is affecting that water quality. If we take the Bain as an example, it might be that the fish aren't there. It might be the eggs are eaten by some other type of creature, fish, whatever. Crayfish are a feature in the Bain now, but the question is it global warming that's brought crayfish in, or is it the extra nutrients that might be helping them to grow in these areas? So the question is, do we as a council support the idea of allowing this effluent to be put into channels and then hopefully diverted and taken out to sea? Bearing in mind that if we're talking about the Bain as an example, what was a chalk stream now might potentially have things floating through it. Water quality's disappeared. It goes through Horncastle. It goes into the Witham. So by the time you get to Boston, it can get more interesting. If we take the Trent as another example, somebody told me that by the time the water of the Trent gets to Gainsborough, it's been through the sewage works 7 times. And you look over the side of the bridge and it is a bit grey and murky in there. But you do wonder if that's actually factually correct or not. But yes, we are taking all of the water, as Morgan's alluded to, from Leicestershire, from way down to Birmingham, from way up into the Peak District. And all of that water, whether it's processed or not, is in that water channel. So do we care about it? That's the question. And I'll give you that one as an opener. I care about it, and I think we should try and cleanse it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fleetwood. Good point and well made. I think, for my mind, the question is potentially whether in 2024 the discharge of raw sewage into rivers or into the sea is something that as a country, as a community, we should ever regard as remotely acceptable. Over the history of the last 150, 200 years of human expansion and the development of waste treatment and waste discharge processes, all we have in effect achieved is moving it a bit further downstream. If you think of Bazalgette and London and the massive works, this Victorian icon of engineering, all Bazalgette did was gather up all of the sewage and discharge it a bit further downstream on the Thames than it was currently entering into the Thames prior to his intervention. Twice a day the pumping station fired up and at the right point in the time literally dumped the entire contents of those systems straight into the Thames in hope that the tide would take it a bit further down toward Kent and Essex. And to an extent, we've improved on that massively, but we still have got the example wherein at a period of peak flow and storm overflows, this material is still being discharged into our into rivers and still being discharged into the sea. And at a much lower level, where you have discharges from, for example, caravan sites, in the area that I represent, we used to enjoy a lovely little raft race at Anton's Gout, a fantastic community event that happened year in, year out, cannot take place anymore because there's a sewage discharge from a caravan site on that drain, and because DEFRA will not properly fund the Environment Agency to do enforcement, that is I think a Category 3 pollution incident, which comes with no enforcement. There's no finance, there's no facility for the Environment Agency to get involved and enforce on that. And yet that's caused the end of a community, of a little community event. So I think it is, how seriously do we take this stuff as a council, as a community, and whether we're prepared to accept it. And if we're not prepared to accept it, whether again as a nation we are prepared to put the kind of money into the engineering to make sure that it doesn't happen and it doesn't need to happen with the frequency that it apparently does. Councillors Haig and Clark, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate any reduction in sewer overflows into our environment. It's everything. Any reduction has got to be welcomed. Will it ever go as quickly as all of us want? And the answer is no, unfortunately. Thank you for the report, Matt. Very useful. two things that I've got, and I'm trying to think of the second one, but the first one is you don't, there's nowhere that I've seen in the report that says the category of the incident of these. And I've just remembered what the second point was. Are all the overflows, are they all monitored, and how are they monitored? And if they're monitored remotely, how often is that checked to ensure that the monitor is working? Thank you.
So all our overflows are monitored. They're monitored by things called event duration monitors. Essentially, a monitor on the flat valve of the discharge pipe. It senses when the flap's opened. And we are currently working, it was released slightly prematurely with some bugs, but we are working on a live map. So, and I think Lisa, when she presented at the last meeting, gave some screenshots of it that will tell people closest to an hour's accuracy if there's a CSO that's actively spilling. So yes, they are monitored, and the visibility will be there for the general public to see where CSOs are actively spilling and where they have spilled, in the last 24 hours, 36 hours, to help inform people on where it may be safe or not to publicly bathe.
If I can come back, thank you, Chairman. That's fine. I'd like to know, we also don't have a rainfall indicator on this chart that says if there's an overflow, is it an acceptable overflow because that catchment has received a lot of rainfall, or if it's overflow, if it's discharging and we're in dry or normal weather conditions, then it's obviously a serious problem. Might not necessarily be the amount that's going there, but it's a serious problem that needs attending. So I've got no way of knowing, looking at these, whether it's all been caused with Storm Babette or it was a nice sunny day for the last 6 months.
Correct, and I will feed that back in terms of adding some rainfall data. Obviously, we don't have a rainfall gauge at every single EDM event duration monitor, and in order to link other nearby gauges might give you a false positive, so it could be raining a kilometre away, but it might not be raining at that EDM, so it could give you a false idea that it is rain. What I would say to satisfy the need for scrutiny, I suppose, is that if we were spilling and it wasn't, and we're not consented to, so if we weren't in storm conditions and we were spilling, the Environment Agency would scrutinise that and investigate that thoroughly. And if we spill outside our permit and that's proven, that's classed as a Category 1 or Category 2 pollution. And most fines are handed out by obviously magistrates. So we are regulated and held to account where we do spill outside of our consent to do so.
Would you like to come back?
I'd like to come back with one further question, and then I'll shut up for the rest of the meeting, if I may, Chairman.
Don't do that. It's fine.
Now I've been speaking to you. I've lost the thread of what I was going to say. The trouble is with the EA is that we're already aware that they could do with a lot more money. So I guess it's the Anglian Water that's notifying the EA of any spillage into the watercourse. And I just wonder if Anglian Water actually collects sufficient information or all the information so the EA aren't even aware of some of the discharges. Thank you, Chairman.
So we self-report a lot of our pollutions. We also have public signage at a lot of our CSOs asking people to report them if they are actively spilling. And on the new system we have, it will tell you what the status of the investigation about a spilling CSO is. So I believe there's going to be a coloured chart on there as to whether it's spilling within consent, i.e. rainfall, whether it's not, whether it's been investigated. But we do self-report 99% of our own pollutions to the Environment Agency, and we have self-reported a number of our more expensive fines, related pollutions, to the Environment Agency. We don't just pick and choose what Anglian Water reports. So on our telemetry system, we send a file every single week to the Environment Agency showing all of our EDMs that have come into spill, and also our pump stations where our floats detect an overflow. The VEA are fully informed of all our spills, and but that is self-reported. Correct, it is, but we're very, very transparent on that.
Thank you. Just something of a question for me, just to help me understand, and colleagues likewise, who, again, appreciating it's been a few months since we heard the presentation. On page 61, where you're listing on that table average spill, what are they quantities of? Are they litres, or what does 9.40 mean? What does 32.37 mean? And when you're saying average duration, is that in terms of minutes or hours over that year?
I would have to get back on that. It's not flow, because the EDMs just measure whether a valve is open or not. So it's not flow. It'll be a time frame period. I'll speak to Lisa and get back on what unit that is for you. Sorry.
Thank you. Again, I think it would just help. It would certainly help me understand what volume we're talking about here, because the language talks of a spill. Well, I think of a spill as when I spill my coffee, and I'm imagining this is this is significantly larger volumes than my coffee cup. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Totally agree with what every councillor has said today about this. Page 64, it states we will, between 2025 and 2030, we will invest over 28 million. Where's that 28 million coming from? Is it less, that the shareholders are going to get, or is it going to be an increase in bill that's actually paying for it?
So most of the investment into our region, this included, is led by our shareholders, making investments into our infrastructure. There has been an announcement about the increase in people's water bills, but it's a mix of both, but predominantly led by shareholder investment.
Can you tell us how much you invested in the last 10 years?
In terms of CSO reduction? I'd have to get the figures specifically for CSO reduction, so can I come back to you on that?
Thank you. I think it is worth, I'm not wishing, fully appreciating that Anglian Water is going above and beyond its legislative requirements. And I'm grateful to note that between 2025 and 2030, obviously, there will be a £28 million investment in the Lincolnshire area. It's interesting, I was just glancing on the internet that first 6 months of 2023-24 saw Anglian Water achieve a 8.8% increase in revenue and a 10.6% increase in operating profit to 255.9 million. And I appreciate this obviously has to be stretched across the whole country, but it is interesting just when we read the figures as they are here against that overall company position, sorry, not over the country, over the Anglian Water region, that there does seem to be quite a large gap. I don't see anyone else indicating to speak. We have, of course, got the motion from the County Council meeting back on the 15th of September, which calls on our MPs, water companies and the Environment Agency to take whatever action is necessary to stop raw sewage discharges in our area at the earliest possible time, and also that this matter be referred to this committee where it can be fully aired and action available to this council can be determined. Probably regrettable to all of us that this isn't something that we can, in a vote this afternoon, agree to stop. We are reliant on national frameworks and national legislation, but I would be minded to suggest that we do request that the portfolio holder, that Councillor Davey, does write to government, to the relevant minister, making the views of this council and this committee known. And as far as we've discussed so far this afternoon, I feel that that is supportive of the view of the county council came to on 15th of September, that the discharge of raw sewage into watercourses and into the sea is not acceptable and should not be considered acceptable in the 21st century, and that the system of regulation that is in place is upgraded and enhanced so as to bring this practice to an end. I would say within, I mean, if anyone would like to volunteer timescale, but I would say certainly within the next 20 years, this should have ceased. Yeah, I mean, I would like it to finish tomorrow, but appreciate that there's a fair bit of engineering and effort and planning that would be required, but at the same time, it would be useful to put a number on it, a year on it, a line in the sand, so that, again, not appreciating that ministers are perhaps going to read our letter with interest and respond immediately, or perhaps not. We can at least give them something that they've got to reply to, or certainly reply to Councillor Davey in respect of. Would you be content with that being our actions on this item, that we do raise this, that we do put our views very firmly? Councillor Fleetwood.
Well, rather than trying for the committee or for yourself to pin down the date, it will be the portfolio holder that writes the letter. And so I'd probably think that we should defer that timescale, but send a message to the portfolio holder that he asks for a response in a certain amount of time.
Yep. Very happy to leave a degree of discretion around those bits. Are you moving that, Councillor Fleetwood? I'm looking for a second. Councillor Skinner.
Happy to second, as long as we receive updates on progress. I think that's really, really important as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, very least we'll expect the Minister to reply, and that reply will be communicated, okay, their secretary to reply, and our and whatever reply that is, by whomever it is, will be communicated to this committee, and we can follow it up at that point. Can I just have a show of hands in favour of that action? Thank you. That is carried, which leads us neatly on to item 10, which is the Flood and Water Management Scrutiny Committee Work Programme, pages 67 to 70. Simon, please.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the standard item where the committee is invited to consider its future items. There are two other actions that are also requested today. The first is that whether for the council year or municipal year beginning in May, the committee would wish to timetable 4 meetings. In the current schedule, only 3 have been timetabled. The usual practice is that this committee meets 4 times each municipal year. And the second additional action is whether the committee would wish to agree in principle, following the success of the visits which were held on the 15th of October last year, whether the committee would wish to agree to another a day of visits, perhaps in the summer or autumn of this year. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And just by way of a bit of background to that, we have, because 24 to 25 will be an election year, that's my understanding the reason why we've lost a meeting in our calendar. My view is that we really didn't ought to lose a meeting in our calendar. It's not as though we're one of those committees that are meeting monthly or 6 weekly. If we are effectively losing 25% of our meetings, I would rather us stick to having the 4 meetings if you are agreeable to that, colleagues. I'm in your hands entirely. But I'm sure whenever I look at our agenda, whenever we've got a lot of stuff going on at the moment with Babbitt and Henk, but there are other things that we have talked about that we would like to pick up as part of that. So could I just have an indication? I'm happy to move that we have 4 meetings. Seconded, Councillor Bunny, just a show of hands that we are in agreement with that. Thank you very much, that's appreciated. And similarly, on a site visit, obviously at this stage it's up for grabs where we would like to go. There were elements with the Humber that we weren't able to visit last year because it was wet. Could I suggest that thought is given potentially to a site visit, ideally in July rather than in October, in hope that it might be a bit better weather? I know we like to sort of like to see this stuff in live action, but it's nicer if we can get to it. What's your thoughts? Councillor Ashley Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think the site visit we did last time, which rather ironically was about 5 days before the first storm, was incredibly useful, because at least then when things had failed, you knew where they were and what they looked like. So yeah, I'd very much suggest that we do that, and possibly even other areas that suffer similar problems to us. I mean, one that springs readily to mind for me is Somerset, because you've got exactly the same. You've got the Mendip Hills and the Levels, which is, and they seem to cope considerably better in some aspects than us. So looking at things like that, I think would be invaluable, and I'd certainly like to propose, if it's necessary, that we actually look at July or even earlier when the weather's potentially better, to look at something more local. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I can't promise we're going to get to Somerset unless Somerset would like to invite us. However, certainly within Lincolnshire, there are parts of the county. We all know our own patch, and I know East Lindsey, Boston. I'm getting to know the Welland and the Cobbett Washes, having been to see it. But there are parts where we don't, and where we don't get. So can I suggest that, are you happy to delegate, obviously Matthew isn't here, that we work up a programme and a date and something that will entertain everyone? Are you happy with that? Thank you very much. Our next meeting is on the 24th of June. Has anyone got anything they specifically would like to see coming to that committee? If you can't think of anything now, by all means, drop an email through. Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, in discussion with Environment Agency colleagues, we'll be looking to bring a report on the Lincolnshire 2100, Lincolnshire Coast 2100 Plus project for an update, if that's at all possible in the next meeting.
I'm sure colleagues would very much appreciate it. I'll declare an interest. I'm on the programme board for that through the RFCC. But yes, that would be a really interesting project to bring. And obviously, I'm assuming there may well be other topics that come up in the meantime that we can drop into that agenda. So seeing, and obviously, if anyone has anything that they particularly would like us to give consideration to debate and scrutiny, please do drop me an email and the team, and we'll see what we can do. I think that happily concludes the requirements of that item and the business of the meeting. Could I thank you all for your contributions this morning, particularly colleagues and contributors that we may or may not have given a hard time to. Thank you for your answers and your candidness. And colleagues, have a safe journey and enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you.